Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. The military helicopter vibrated violently as it moved through Earth's atmosphere, taking him to the alien event the humans called a Marine boot camp. He stood rigid, close to the open door, his bulky green form taking up nearly twice the space of the human standing beside him. Black veins expanded and contracted visibly beneath his skin as he tried to maintain composure despite the unfamiliar gravity pulling at his insides. Kratos had expected many challenges as the first Tridorian warrior to participate in the interspecies military exchange program, but the physical discomfort of Earth itself hadn't been adequately covered in his briefing materials. Everything felt wrong. The air too thin and wet, the sunlight too yellow, the gravity somehow both stronger than his homeworld, yet not to the point it would keep him from walking. He studied the two humans observing him with concealed excitement. These semi-furred creatures, with their disgusting patches of keratin filament sprouting from their scalps, seemed entirely too enthusiastic about whatever was about to happen. Though his cultural training had been extensive, nothing had prepared him for the casual demeanor of Earth's military personnel. "Ready for the fall, big guy?" asked the one called David Strong, raising his voice over the helicopter's rotor noise. "First time using a jetpack can be rough." "I am." Kratos' translator implant searched for the appropriate human expression to express that he needed more time. "Almost ready." The second human, Alexei Agapov, flashed a set of blunt white teeth in what Kratos recognized as a smile. "Wait until you try what comes next. Much more exciting than a helicopter." Kratos' secondary eyelids fluttered with suspicion as David patted a sleek black device strapped to his own back. Before him, the ground of the alien planet felt disturbingly distant. "How can this flying object on my back be controlled?" "Don't worry about the controls. They're completely self-explanatory. Don't be a pussy," David said with a grin, moments before shoving Kratos forward. One moment, he was holding the frame, and then he wasn't anymore. The ground of Earth, a tiny blue-green speck thousands of meters below, seemed to rush up to meet Kratos as he tumbled through the air, his limbs flailing uselessly against gravity. His bulky green form spun wildly, black veins bulging across his skin from the sudden surge of fear hormones that coursed through his physiology. Just moments before, Kratos had been standing nervously in the loading bay of the human spacecraft, trying to understand why these Earth Marines seemed so exciting about jumping out of a perfectly functioning flying machine. As the first military exchange program between Earth and Trador, Kratos had expected formal ceremonies, tactical discussions, maybe even some weapon comparisons, not being unceremoniously shoved out of a spacecraft with what the humans called a jetpack strapped to his back. "You're gonna love this part of orientation," David Strong had assured him, slapping his broad green shoulder with a camaraderie that Kratos found perplexing. "Seriously, we had to pull some strings to get you up here. Usually, only Marsoc guys get to do halo jumps." The other human, Alexei Agapov, nodded enthusiastically. "It's tradition for welcoming interstellar warriors to Earth. Very big honor." Kratos didn't understand why these two were even here together. According to his briefing, Earth's military forces were divided along geographic and political lines. David was from something called the United States Marine Corps, and Alexei belonged to the Russian Naval Infantry. Why would opposing military forces coordinate for his arrival? The humans had explained it as special arrangements for this rare occasion, but it seemed inefficient and confusing, much like everything else about humans. And now, here he was, plummeting through Earth's atmosphere with no idea how to activate the supposedly self-explanatory device strapped to his back. Kratos twisted his thick neck to look up and saw both humans had also leapt from the craft, but unlike his wild tumbling, they were falling in controlled positions, arms and legs outstretched in what appeared to be deliberate postures. "They're not falling like me! Why are they not falling like me?" his mind screamed as he continued his chaotic descent. The control grips in his hands seemed to mock him with their complexity. The left handle had a red trigger under his index finger, 3 buttons under his thumb, and a dial he could rotate with his palm. The right was even more confusing, a throttle-like mechanism, 2 flip switches, and what appeared to be a small digital readout displaying numbers that were dropping as rapidly as he was. "Self-explanatory," Kratos roared into the rushing wind. "Which part is self-explanatory?" He tried pressing the red trigger on the left handle. Nothing happened. He rotated the dial on the left. Still nothing. He squeezed the throttle on the right, and his wild spin only accelerated. "I am Kratos, primary warrior of the Trador hegemony. I have defeated the acrid beasts of Vorkon Prime. I survived the vacuum mines of the Krell expansion. I will not die falling through the atmosphere of this primitive world." But as the ground rushed closer, Kratos began to contemplate the life choices that had led him to this moment. Why he had volunteered for this exchange program? Why had he believed the human ambassadors when they said it would strengthen interspecies relations? Why had he left his life mate, Krasa, and their 3 spawnlings for this? "Krasa will avenge me," he thought grimly. "She is a fierce warrior, second only to myself among our people. She will rain destruction upon these treacherous humans for their petty murder plot." The ground was now close enough that Kratos could make out individual trees in the forest below. He could see a clearing, presumably where they were meant to land, approaching at terminal velocity. He closed his eyes, preparing for impact, his final thoughts turning to his spawnlings, who would grow up without their parental guardian. Suddenly, with a jolt that rattled every bone in his massive alien frame, the jetpack activated. The force was so unexpected that Kratos' eyes snapped open, his arms and legs still flailing in panic as the device took control, slowing his descent dramatically. The sensation was like being yanked upward by an invisible hand, disorienting and somehow more terrifying than the free fall had been. "What is happening?" he bellowed, though no one could hear him. The jetpack guided him, completely independent of his input, toward the clearing below. As the treetops approached, the device modulated its thrust, bringing him into a controlled hover about 2 meters above the ground before unceremoniously cutting power and dropping him the remaining distance. Kratos landed with a heavy thud, the weight of the jetpack throwing him off balance and sending him tumbling across the ground until he came to rest against a tree trunk. He lay there, strapped to the deactivated device, limbs splayed awkwardly, unable to coordinate his movements enough to free himself from the harness. "Whoa! What a rush!" David's voice called out as 2 figures descended gracefully into the clearing, landing on their feet with practiced ease. Both humans jogged over to where Kratos lay immobilized, wearing expressions that seemed to contain both amusement and concern. "You okay there, big guy?" David asked, kneeling beside him and helping to unbuckle the complicated harness system. "First jump's always the scariest." Why did you—" Kratos couldn't even formulate a coherent question, his translator implant struggling to convert his gasping, fear-soaked thoughts into words. "Is tradition for interstellar guests," Alexei said again, helping to lift the jetpack off Kratos' back. "Best way to build trust. Fall together, land together." Kratos noticed that both humans were still wearing their jetpacks, moving with them as if the devices weighed nothing at all. They didn't even bother to unstrap themselves as they helped Kratos to his feet. "You did great," David assured him, though Kratos could detect dishonesty in the human's voice pattern. "Most first-timers screamed the whole way down." "I was not screaming," Kratos insisted, finally regaining some composure. "I was issuing battle cries to intimidate the ground." This elicited laughter from both humans, another perplexing reaction that Kratos' cultural training hadn't prepared him for. "Listen," David said, his tone becoming more serious. "We wanted you to enjoy the fun part first, because what's coming next, well, it's intense." "Fun part?" Kratos repeated, the translator implant struggling to process the concept in this context. "The Crucible," Alexei explained, his face taking on a respectful, almost solemn expression. "Next 54 hours, very difficult, even for us. Final test of marine training. The crucible is no joke," David added. "Limited sleep, limited food, constant physical challenges. Teamwork exercises under extreme stress. It's designed to push you beyond your limits." Kratos was about to respond when a booming voice cut through the clearing. "Attention!" All three turned to see a human approaching, shorter than David and Alexei, but somehow more intimidating. He wore a distinctive hat with a wide, flat brim and moved with a stiffness that even Kratos' military-oriented mind couldn't appreciate. "Drill Sergeant Jones," David whispered quickly. "Stand straight, don't speak unless spoken to." The human called Jones stopped directly in front of Kratos, looking up at the alien warrior without a hint of intimidation despite the significant height difference. "Welcome to Earth, Warrior Kratos of Trador," Jones said, his voice controlled but powerful. "I will be supervising your participation in the Crucible exercise, commencing in approximately 30 minutes. "The what?" Kratos asked, panic rising again. "I was informed this was an observational exchange, not a participation. Your leadership specifically requested you undergo standard Earth marine training procedures," Jones interrupted. "They were quite insistent that you, as Trador's strongest warrior, could handle anything we throw at you." "But I just arrived. I haven't even acclimated to your gravity, your atmosphere. They threw me from the flying machine." "The jetpack was the fun part," Jones stated flatly. "Fun part? Fun part?" Kratos' translator struggled with the volume of his outburst. "Your soldiers pushed me from the flying machine with no instruction." Jones's face remained impassive. "The Mark 7 has automatic activation at 500 meters. You were never in any danger." "Nobody told me this," Kratos protested. "Just like nobody told our Marine, who's currently on Trador, about the exoskeletal adaptation chamber, or the methane swamp navigation exercise," Jones replied. "Your defense minister specifically said, and I quote, 'Kratos can endure any challenge your primitive training can devise. So don't complain about what we do with your weak human.'" Inside Kratos' mind, a terrible realization was dawning. This wasn't some mistake or cruel joke. This was diplomacy. His government had volunteered him for this as a show of Trador superiority, expecting him to breeze through whatever pathetic trials humans could design. And in turn, they were probably subjecting the human exchange marine to the most brutal training regimens Trador had to offer. "I am trapped with these crazy humans," Kratos thought. "If I refuse, I dishonor the hegemony. If I fail, I dishonor the hegemony. There's no escape." "The Crucible will test you in ways you cannot anticipate," Jones continued. "You will carry a 40-pound rucksack and your assigned weapon at all times. You will be permitted approximately 4 hours of sleep over the entire 54-hour period. You will engage in physically demanding drills that require perfect teamwork and coordination." Each new detail made Kratos' heart sink further. His species could survive on less sleep than humans, but the combination of Earth's gravity and the physical exertion with added weight would be exhausting. "Strong, Agapov," Jones barked, turning to the two Marines. "Get your gear and report back here in 10 minutes. You'll be joining Fire Team Bravo with Kratos for the duration of the exercise." "Yes, Drill Sergeant," both humans responded in unison. As Jones marched away, Kratos turned to his companions in desperation. "Is there no way to—" "Sorry, big guy," David cut him off. "Once the Crucible starts, there's only 2 ways out: completion or medical evacuation." But I've not trained for your specific drills, your tactics. We help you, Alexei said firmly. Come, we get equipment now. Stay close to us. We will show you everything. The three jogged across the clearing towards a series of tents set up at the far edge. Despite his greater muscle mass and the supposedly higher gravity of his homeworld, Kratos found himself struggling to keep pace with the humans. By the time they reached the equipment area, he was already breathing heavily. You okay? David asked, noticing Kratos' discomfort. Your atmosphere, thinner than I'm accustomed to, Kratos managed between breaths. It'll get better, David assured him, though Kratos wasn't convinced. Here, let me show you how to pack your ruck correctly. Weight distribution is crucial. While David demonstrated the proper packing technique, Alexei returned with a rifle that he presented to Kratos. Standard M27 infantry automatic rifle, Alexei explained. Is lighter than old models, but still feel heavy after carrying for many hours. Kratos took the weapon, surprised by its primitive design. Traidor forces used pulse rifles that weighed half as much and could fire continuously for hours without overheating. This mechanical contraption, with its metal components and physical ammunition, seemed like something from Traidor's ancient history museums. When they rejoined the larger group of Marines preparing for the Crucible, Kratos felt a wave of dread wash over him. His mental state, already fragile from the jetpack incident, was deteriorating rapidly. He could feel his veins darkening across his skin, a physiological response to extreme stress that his species couldn't control. Hey, David said quietly, noticing the change. One step at a time, okay? Alexei and I have got your back. Why would you help me? Kratos asked, genuinely confused. I'm not of your species, not of your military unit. Because that's what Marines do, David replied simply. We leave no man behind. There was something in the human's eyes, something Kratos hadn't expected to find. Sincerity? The same look he'd seen in the eyes of his own squad members during the Krell conflict. It gave him a small spark of hope, despite how he had viewed these humans as devils when he was plummeting to what he thought would be his death. The Crucible began with a 12-mile march through densely wooded terrain. Each Marine, and one alien, carried their full pack and weapon, moving at a pace that had Kratos struggling within the first kilometer, the black veins across his green skin expanding visibly with exertion. Keep going, David encouraged, dropping back to march alongside him when Kratos began to fall behind. Focus on the next step, not the whole journey. They reached the first challenge station, a simulated urban combat environment, after 3 hours of marching. Kratos' legs were burning, his breathing labored, but he forced himself to stand tall as Jones explained the exercise. You will clear the buildings in teams of 4, Jones announced. Tactical movement, room-clearing protocols, communication is essential. Fire Team Bravo, Strong, Agapov, Martinez, and Kratos. The human, called Martinez, gave Kratos a wary look but nodded respectfully. The 4 of them huddled together as David quickly explained the basic tactics to Kratos. I cannot do this, Kratos whispered desperately. I don't know your protocols. You follow me, Alexei said firmly. I point, you go. I stop, you stop. Simple. Somehow, they made it through the exercise without completely embarrassing themselves. Kratos' movements were clumsy compared to the practiced precision of the Marines, but he followed Alexei's lead as instructed, and the team completed the objective. The day continued with more marches, more challenge stations. They crossed a water obstacle course where Kratos discovered, to his horror, that his species was naturally less buoyant than humans in earth water. David and Alexei had to physically drag him across one section, all 3 emerging coughing and sputtering on the far bank. They tackled an obstacle course where Kratos' greater strength was finally an advantage, allowing him to climb walls with ease, though his bulkier frame made the tunnel crawls nearly impossible, making him a burden to his team. By the time night fell, they had completed only the first third of the Crucible's challenges. Kratos had never been so exhausted in his life, Every muscle in his body ached. His skin was chafed in places where the human-designed pack rubbed against him, and his feet had developed what the humans called blisters, a painful condition he'd never experienced before. Their fire team found a relatively quiet spot to prepare their evening meal, something the humans called MREs, or meals ready to eat. Kratos examined the brown package with suspicion. "How does one activate the heating element?" he asked, turning the package over in his hands. David laughed, not unkindly, and showed him how to use the chemical heater. The four of them sat in a small circle, too tired to speak much as they ate. Finally, Martinez broke the silence. "So, what's it like on Trador? Your military training must be intense if this is considered an exchange program." Kratos considered the question carefully. "Different. Our gravity is 0.9 times Earth standard. Our atmosphere is denser, richer in nitrogen. But our training focuses more on individual combat expertise than your team-coordinated approach." "Individual combat?" Alexei asked. "No teams?" "We train in units," Kratos clarified. "But each warrior is expected to function independently if necessary. Your approach, this constant support, adjustment to accommodate team members' weaknesses, it is not our way." "That's like the whole point of being Marines," David said. "The unit is stronger than any individual." Kratos thought about how many times today he would have failed, or perhaps even been injured, without David and Alexei's constant assistance. On Trador, warriors who couldn't keep up were left behind, expected to either find their own way or accept the consequences of their weakness. As the others shared stories about their lives before the Marines, David's childhood in a place called Wisconsin, Alexei's family in Vladivostok, Martinez's dreams of becoming a pilot, Kratos remained mostly silent, listening and observing. Inside, his thoughts churned. He had been so quick to assume the worst of these humans when they'd pushed him from the aircraft. He'd been prepared to hate them, to report back to the hegemony about their treachery and cruelty. But throughout this brutal day, they had shown him something unexpected. Not weakness, as he had been taught to expect from physically inferior species, but a different kind of strength. "Perhaps there is something to learn here after all," Kratos thought, watching the three humans laugh together despite their exhaustion. "Though I will never consider that their jetpack tradition was anything but a terrible idea." He hadn't forgiven them entirely for the free-fall terror, but somewhere in the back of his mind, a small, treasonous thought was forming. Maybe, just maybe, these humans weren't the primitive, inferior creatures Trador propaganda had led him to believe. They still had 36 hours of the Crucible left to endure, and Kratos was certain things would only get more difficult from here. But as he looked at the three Marines sitting with him, he felt something he hadn't expected. A cautious optimism that with their help, he might actually survive this hell. The second day of the Crucible only existed in Kratos' mind as fragmented shards of memory, like looking through a broken view screen. His exhausted brain had only retained flashes of the grueling experience, jagged pieces that didn't quite fit together into a coherent timeline. He remembered the weapons training, how the primitive projectile rifle had bruised his shoulder with each shot. The humans called it recoil, a concept entirely foreign to Trador energy weapons. After the fifth shot, his entire right side had ached, the black veins beneath his green skin darkening to a deep purple from the repeated impact. "Lean into it more," David had instructed, adjusting Kratos' stance. "Anticipate the kick." Kratos had tried, but his physiology distributed weight differently. Each shot sent painful vibrations through his skeletal structure in ways the humans couldn't understand. Another fragment, the communal shower facility. The humans had insisted on proper hygiene despite being in a simulated combat scenario. Another peculiarity Kratos couldn't fathom. He'd stood awkwardly at the edge of the tiled room, watching the casual way the humans stripped down and moved about naked, seemingly unconcerned with their vulnerability. "Water conservation," Drill Sergeant Jones had barked.
2 minutes per Marine. That includes you, Warrior Credo.
Reluctantly, he'd removed his gear and stepped under the cold spray, acutely aware of the sideways glances his alien anatomy attracted. The water had a strange mineral composition that made his nose itch, but the brief respite from exertion had been almost worth the discomfort. Then there was the incident with what the humans called a bee, a tiny flying creature that had landed on Kratos's arm during a brief rest period. Unfamiliar with Earth fauna, he'd observed it with curiosity until it had suddenly jabbed a sharp appendage into his skin. His instinctive reaction, a battle roar and violent swatting motion, had sent nearby Marines diving for cover, thinking they were under attack. "Just a bee sting?" Martinez had explained, barely containing his laughter while Alexei and David helped calm the startled troops. "Happens to everyone."
"Your planet actively attacks visitors?"
Kratos had grumbled, the small puncture on his arm swelling to twice its normal size, his alien biochemistry reacting strongly to the unfamiliar toxin. These disconnected moments were all his exhausted brain had preserved from the countless drills, marches, and tactical exercises that had filled that second day. The rest was a blur of muscle pain, thirst, and the constant weight of the pack digging into his shoulders. As dusk fell on the second day, Kratos had expected, hoped desperately, for the brief rest period they'd been granted the previous night. Instead, Drill Sergeant Jones had gathered the squads together with news that sent Kratos's heart sinking.
"Night navigation exercise,"
Jones announced, his voice showing no sympathy for their exhausted state.
15 miles through varied terrain. Full gear, no lights except for map checks. Your objective is to reach checkpoint Delta by 0400.
A collective groan rose from the assembled Marines, quickly silenced by Jones's glare.
"This phase separates the Marines from the wannabes,"
Jones continued.
"Fire team integrity is essential. You will start at 5-minute intervals. Bravo team, you're first up."
Kratos stood with leaden limbs as David quickly reviewed their route on the map. 15 Earth miles. After 2 days of constant physical exertion, with barely any sleep, carrying full combat loads.
"I cannot."
Kratos began to whisper to Alexei, but cut himself off. No. He would not voice weakness. He was Trador's champion, sent to prove their superiority. If these physically inferior humans could endure this trial, then so must he. As they assembled at the starting point, David gave him a concerned look.
"Stay between me and Alexei. We'll set the pace." "I require no assistance for running,"
Kratos replied stiffly. "Everyone needs help sometimes," Martinez said quietly. "No shame in it." But there was shame in it, at least for a Trador warrior. To accept help for something so basic was to admit weakness, and weakness was unforgivable. Better to fail honorably than succeed through the charity of others. That was the Trador way.
"Begin!"
Jones shouted, and Fireteam Bravo moved out into the darkness. The first minutes were manageable. Kratos's night vision was naturally better than the humans, and the terrain was relatively flat. But as they entered the dense forest and began to climb upward, each step became a battle of will against his screaming muscles. His breaths came in ragged gasps, the Earth's oxygen content insufficient for his physiology under such exertion. The weight of the pack seemed to increase with every meter, as if the planet's gravity was specifically targeting him for torture. Several times, David or Alexei moved closer, clearly intending to offer support, but Kratos deliberately increased his pace to avoid them. He would not become their burden. He would not bring shame to the hegemony by using those humans for support. 6 minutes into the march, they had reached a steep ravine that had to be navigated by a narrow path winding down one side and up the other. Kratos's legs trembled with each downward step, threatening to buckle beneath him. "Take it slow," David advised from behind. "No rush." But there was a rush. The deadline of 0400 loomed over them, and Kratos's pride would not allow him to be the reason they failed. He pushed onward, each footfall a potential disaster as loose rocks shifted beneath his boots. Halfway across the ravine floor, a wave of dizziness swept over him. The world tilted sideways, the stars above smearing into streaks of light as his vision swam. He stumbled, caught himself, then forced his body forward through sheer willpower. Up the other side of the ravine, each step became a monumental achievement. His world narrowed to the small patch of ground directly in front of him. Everything else faded to a dim periphery of shapes and shadows. He was vaguely aware of voices around him, fragments of conversation floating through his consciousness like debris in space. "Holding up okay?"
Worried about...
Never seen anyone push through like... Then one phase penetrated the fog of his exhaustion with crystal clarity.
"Good pace, everyone. First mile complete. 14 to go."
The words struck Kratos like a physical blow. First mile? Only the first mile? His mind struggled to process this information, refusing to accept its implications. They had been marching for what he perceived as hours, suffering for hours, and had only completed 1/15 of their journey. It was impossible. It was unbearable. It was... darkness. Kratos found himself standing at the entrance to his home on Trador. The familiar yellow-tinged vegetation of his garden swayed gently in the breeze, and the lower gravity made his body feel buoyant, almost weightless after the crushing pressure of Earth. Relief flooded through him. Had it all been some terrible dream? A training simulation, perhaps? The door slid open, and there stood Kraza, his life mate, her green skin marked with the distinctive black vein patterns that had first attracted him to her. But instead of the warm welcome he expected, her face was set in an expression of cold disdain.
"Kraza?"
he said uncertainly.
"You are not welcome here,"
she replied, her voice harder than he had ever heard it.
"You are not the warrior I joined with." "What do you mean? I'm completing the exchange mission as ordered by the hegemony."
"You have failed," she stated flatly.
"Word has reached us of your weakness. How you could not even complete the simplest physical challenges of the humans without assistance. You shame not only yourself, but our entire species." "No, I tried my best. The conditions were..." "Excuses," she cut him off. "The Kratos I knew would never offer excuses. The Kratos I knew would have conquered any challenge, regardless of the circumstances."
Behind her, Kratos could see their spawnlings watching from the interior doorway, their eyes reflecting the same disappointment he saw in Kraza's.
"You are not the warrior you once were,"
Kraza continued mercilessly.
"You are broken, weak. I dissolve our life bond."
Despair crashed over him like a tidal wave, crushing his heart and stealing his breath. He had failed his mission, failed his species, failed his family.
"It was the humans," he cried out in anguish. "They designed their training to be impossible. David and Alexei, they tricked me. They're not friends. They set me up for failure."
Kraza's expression didn't change.
"More excuses, more weakness."
She began to close the door, and Kratos lunged forwards desperately, reaching out.
"Coming around. Give him space."
The yellow landscape of home dissolved, replaced by the concerned faces of David, Alexei, and Martinez looking down at him. He was lying on his back on the forest floor, the weight of his pack removed from his shoulders. Beyond them stood Drill Sergeant Jones, arms crossed, but with an expression that, surprisingly, wasn't entirely disapproving.
"Welcome back, warrior,"
Jones said.
"Congratulations to Fire Team Bravo on completing the night navigation exercise with all team members intact."
Kratos blinked in confusion, his mind still partially trapped in the devastating dream.
"Completing? But how?"
He looked from face to face, finding no answers in their expressions. "You don't remember?" David asked, genuine concern in his voice.
We had only walked 1 mile,"
Kratos said, shame coloring his voice.
"I must have failed."
Alexei and David exchanged a glance, then broke into tired smiles.
"You walked 13 miles on your own,"
Alexei explained, his voice filled with something like awe.
Your body kept moving even when your mind checked out. We've seen sleep marches before, David added, but never like that. You were like a machine. But the last 2 miles, Martinez interjected, that's when it got weird. You started talking, saying some pretty harsh stuff about humans and yourself. Saying bad things about how I had failed, Kratos murmured, the dream still vivid in his mind. About how David and Alexei were not friends but had tricked me. Yeah, that's it exactly, David nodded. But then you were stumbling badly, so we had to support you between us for the final stretch. Got you here just 10 minutes before the deadline. Kratos struggled to sit up, his body protesting every movement. But something stronger than physical pain was flowing through him, a profound gratitude that words could not adequately express. They had carried him. After he had rejected their help, after he had insisted on proving himself alone, after he had, in his delirium, accused them of treachery, they had still refused to leave him behind. He began, then stopped, unsure how to proceed. Trade-or warriors didn't thank others for assistance. Trade-or warriors didn't acknowledge help, but he was no longer just a trade-or warrior. He was something else now, something changed by his experience. I will honor your names forever, he finally said, the formal trade-or declaration of life debt feeling both appropriate and woefully insufficient. I didn't fail, and Kraza won't abandon me. David tilted his head curiously. Is that how it works in your culture? Your partner would leave you if you failed a military challenge? The question jolted Kratos fully back to reality. No, that wasn't how it works at all. Kraza was a warrior herself. She understood the realities of combat, of missions, of challenges that exceeded even the strongest warrior's capacity. The nightmare had been just that, a nightmare born of exhaustion and cultural pressure, not reality. No, he admitted, his tone awkward. My mind was, playing tricks. Kraza would never. That's not her way. Good to hear, Martinez said. Because if you think this was hard, you should try marriage. The humans laughed, and after a moment Kratos joined them, a strange, rasping sound that few humans had ever heard from a Tridorian. Then, without further ceremony, he toppled backward, consciousness finally claiming its due as his systems shut down for desperately needed recovery. 5 days later, Kratos walked the stark white corridor of the Trador diplomatic vessel in orbit around Earth. His body had mostly healed, though certain movements still triggered twinges of pain, souvenirs of the crucible that his physiology was still processing. He moved toward the central junction where, according to the mission brief, he would meet the human marine who had been sent to Trador while Kratos endured Earth's training. They would cross paths here, each returning to their homeworld with whatever lessons they had learned from the exchange. From the opposite end of the corridor, a human figure approached, walking with the distinctive posture of someone accustomed to much higher gravity. As they drew nearer, Kratos could see the physical toll the Trador training regime had taken on the human. New scars on visible skin, a slight limp, shoulders held at an angle that suggested healing injuries beneath the uniform. They stopped when they reached each other, two warriors from different worlds, each forever changed by what they had experienced. So, you are Thomas, Kratos said, breaking the silence. The human nodded, his eyes evaluating Kratos with interest. And you're Kratos, I suppose. Before Kratos could reply, Thomas laughed, not mockingly, but with the genuine mirth of shared hardship. Your homeworld was brutal. Your combat instructors are merciless. And that methane swamp? I still have nightmares. He paused, then added with unexpected pride. But I made it through. Feel like the best warrior in the world now. He studied Kratos for a moment longer. What about you? Learn anything from our primitive training methods? Kratos took his time answering, the memories of the Crucible, both the suffering and the revelations, washing through his mind. It was challenging in ways I did not anticipate, he finally said. But I've learned that I can win any battle, as long as I have the best warriors on my team. Thomas just laughed, placed a hand on Kratos' shoulder, and walked past him. I see, he said,
Good for you.